Truth Bible Perspective. Welcome to another episode. The purpose of this episode is to show the crumbling infrastructure of America in the scriptures. Now, America is known as Babylon the Great. We all know that. But one of the reasons that made America so great, which most people might not know or might not consider, is its infrastructure. All right. Elder Ramlab did a lesson on the infrastructure, and you can find that at his webpage, Bringing the Heat to You. The name of it is called America's Falling Apart. So if you want, you can head on over there and get some more insight on the brother's lesson. Now I'm about to go into my lesson called The Worm. The reason why I call it the worm is pursuant to Isaiah, the 14th chapter, where it mentions about the worm is spread under thee. And as you'll see in this lesson, the word worm basically alludes to corruption or decay. Alright, so it's called the worm, America's crumbling infrastructure. Now the first thing I should do is give you the definition of the word infrastructure. Now this is from Merriam-Webster online. We'll read number 1 and number 3. Definition of infrastructure: the underlying foundation or basic framework as of a system or organization. And the systems across America and the organizations across America is tied to the infrastructure, because it's through the infrastructure that one is able to move around and conduct business. So the infrastructure is very important for activity or business, which leads us into number 3, the definition for number 3: the system of public works of a country, state, or region. Also, the resources as personnel, buildings, or equipment required for an activity. Right, so like I said, a sound infrastructure brings a lot of activity. Now when the infrastructure is not sound, you have what? A decline of activity. And that's where America is heading to, a decline of activity. Before I play this clip, I want to give you an example, because one of the things that made Rome great as an empire was its infrastructure. And I want to show you something over here. Now I remember learning about this in school. You had something in Rome called the Appian Way. It says the Appian Way, Latin and Italian Via Appia, was one of the earliest and strategically most important Roman roads of the ancient republic. And here you see an illustration of this Appian Way. Alright, this line here. So in modern terms it would be coined a highway. Alright, so many of those highways that you see, I-95, I-80, the highways you see from New York to California, the interstate highways, the idea came out of the Roman Empire. And that's one of the things that made the Roman Empire great, was its highways. That's what the Appian Way was. Alright, so now, with the crumbling of the Roman Empire, the ancient Roman Empire, so went its infrastructure. And that's the exact same thing that's happening with America. With the crumbling of America, so goes its infrastructure. Remember, if we go back to the definition, again, I'll read it. It says, the system of public works of a country, state, or region. This is how important the infrastructure is. Also, the resources as personnel, buildings, part of the infrastructure, or equipment required for an activity. Right, so again, like I said, if the activity or if the infrastructure goes down, starts crumbling, so does the activity. Now I want to play this clip here to shed some more insight on the lesson.
America's infrastructure is collapsing. We've had some shocking glimpses. The levees in New Orleans, the interstate bridge that went down in Minneapolis, the massive East Coast blackout of 2003.
Imagine a month-long blackout. Imagine major failures of water delivery system in the West. Imagine levee breakdowns that can't be repaired.
That's what America's heading to. Month-long blackouts, which means if you have a month-long blackout, then all the food you have stored in your refrigerator that is perishable, if it's not kept cold, you can forget about it. So that's where your famine comes in. Alright? And then at night, you're going to have a lot of what? Looting and pretty much chaos. Alright? So this is where America's heading to. Month-long blackouts.
We're headed down the road, without much exaggeration, to being a second world or a third world country.
This is the United States of America. Why is our infrastructure in such bad shape?
And we're going to answer that question, why the infrastructure is in such bad shape. It all goes back to the funding or the budget of America. You're going to find out that the majority of the budget of America is not given to the infrastructure, but to the military. And it's the same exact thing with the Roman Empire. Alright, the majority of the Roman Empire's budget was given to the military, so they could maintain that idea of being a empire, you know, with this great military. They even had to cheapen their own money system, the denarius, to maintain that so-called empire. And it's the same thing with America. America is cheapening. At one time, the dollar bill was the premier system of money used all over the world, the American dollar. But now they had to cheapen it. The Americans had to cheapen it to what? To further their empire. It's the exact same thing with the Roman Empire. Which proves that America is nothing but the modern day Roman Empire, like Elder Tar been saying in his lessons.
Infrastructure. It's so intrinsic to society that we never think about it, the way we never think about the bones in our body until they start to break.
Mesopotamia, the Incas, the Indus Valley, all of those societies started with dikes and levees and agriculture and roads, and without that, humans would never have risen above the hunter-gatherer status.
Bad things happen when an empire allows its infrastructure to decline.
When we look at Rome as a great civilization, a big part of what made it so great was the infrastructure, the road.
Yeah, it was the infrastructure, like the example I showed you here, the Appian Way. Alright, that's a perfect example.
Road systems, the bridges, the aqueducts. As the Romans started to neglect that investment, it crumbled and collapsed, and we ended up with the Dark Ages.
From the 1930s to the 1960s, the United States built the greatest infrastructure the world had ever seen, and it played a critical role in our rise as a superpower. That whole build-out is reaching the end of its life cycle and groaning under loads it was never supposed to handle. Design flaws, not enough money, normal corrosion, and decades of deferred maintenance have conspired to break America's infrastructure down.
We Americans today have been a lot like a generation who's inherited our grandparents' mansion. You know, people are driving by going, nice house. But when you go inside it, it's falling apart.
Yeah, this devil said they inherited their grandpa's mansion. No, you didn't inherit it, you stole it. Alright? You stole it from the so-called North American Indians. And this is exactly why we call this so-called white man the devil. The word devil means deceiver. He can't tell the truth. You know, the scripture have said they, as soon as they be born, they speak what? Lies. Alright, so that's part of the reason why America's crumbling, because of the way that the so-called white man got America. He got it by wickedness. Alright, now, let me go to the next clip. Shed a little bit more light on this topic.
This is the last way delivery man Mike Sweeney ever expected he'd be commuting to work.
How did you used to commute?
Like everybody else. Drive over the bridge.
No big deal.
No big deal.
That's the Lake Champlain Bridge between New York and Vermont, when there still was a bridge. FDR opened it in 1928, and it carried as many as 4,000 vehicles a day until last fall, when, with almost no warning, it was closed. The American Society of Civil Engineers issues a report card every 4 years on the state of America's infrastructure. And the last one in 2009 was not good at all. The overall grade was a D.
D. That's as good as it gets.
And it's not getting any better. Back in 2005, we also did a report card, and it was still a D there, so we haven't gained any ground.
Andrew Herman helped write the report card, which examined every aspect of the country's infrastructure. Bridges got a C, but even with that average grade, 12% of them, more than 72,000 bridges, are too old, or what's politely called structurally deficient.
Well, it means we've been ignoring our infrastructure for decades. We've been underinvesting in what we have.
The problem with bridges became impossible to ignore in 2007 when the I-35 bridge collapsed in Minneapolis.
Now that might have been a inside job done by the elites, you know, to cause chaos, to bring legislation. But basically that's a reality. You know, a lot of these bridges all across America, a lot of them are not structurally sound. You just heard him say that the grade that was given for America's infrastructure was a D. Now, you know, if you think back to when you were in school and you got your report card and your report card was a D, then your parents were pretty much ashamed of you. All right, so hey, that's the reality for America. You know, the infrastructure is crumbling, and remember the saying: as the infrastructure goes, the activity of the country, or the activity of the country goes. All right, the activity of the empire goes. Remember the Roman Empire. One of the things that made it great was its infrastructure. All right.
13 people died. Mike Sweeney began rowing to work in Vermont last October when engineers became so alarmed after an underwater inspection of the pilings holding up that bridge.
We have a vertical crack.
That they closed it with just 10 minutes warning. No lives were lost, but life has not been the same since.
80% of my business came across that bridge.
Lisa Cloutier owns what used to be known as the Bridge Restaurant until she decided to change the name, on the Vermont side of Lake Champlain. On a snowy day last December, she watched them blow up that bridge.
Wow.
It wasn't worth saving. Now the only way across is either by ferry or a 90-minute drive. A new bridge will cost at least $70 million. And spending money is part of the solution. China spends 7% of its GDP on infrastructure, India 5%. But the United States spends less than 2%, and engineers think the U.S. will have to spend $2.2 trillion over 5 years to bring the overall grade for infrastructure up to an A.
You know, America, they're more concerned with spending their money on the military. As we'll show you in the lesson, the majority of the money that's allotted to the American budget is given to the military. And it's the same thing with the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, they had to cheapen their money system, which was the denarius. They had to, which was made primarily of silver. They had to cheapen it just to pay for their military. And it's the same thing with America. America is cheapening the so-called American dollar bill, the Federal Reserve note, just so they can pay for their military. So that's another example that proves what Elder Tarr's been saying about America being spiritually the Roman Empire.
Do you think governments will be able to sell taxpayers on this notion?
It's going to be difficult.
But the solution isn't just spending money, it's also spending money wisely.